ageism, which is essentially discrimination or bias on the basis of age, is the one thing that will happen, the one universalism that will hit all of us.
If I'm not mistaken, you were called a dinosaur at the age of 37 by your employer?
Yes, I was called a dino. At first I was like, how rude. Like, I'm not old. What is he talking about? And I looked around the room and I was like, wait a minute. Like, he's actually kind of not wrong here. I am one of the older employees at this company. And how on earth can that be possible? Everybody is worried about, quote, aging out of the workplace, and no one is doing a dang thing about it. This concept that it's impossible to be on the forefront of anything, of innovation or any sort of new frontier if you're over, 25, which is absolutely ludicrous.
But there's also a business side to this, and there's a challenge for organizations to maintain really high operational excellence if they either don't have the right promotion pipeline for younger workers and they don't have the right retention strategy for older ones.
Companies that aren't thinking about what is going to attract, retain, and promote people who are over age 40 in their companies, they're in trouble. We need to be aware that it's going to happen to us because ageism is not going away.
There must be other industries that you've seen that have pushed people out too early because of their age, or might not be given the right pathways for younger people to move forward.
Oh yes, I would also say,
have you ever been told that you're too young to lead, or too old to learn something new, that your season is past or hasn't yet started yet? I'm Bradley Sherman, and this is Population Next. On this episode of Population Next, we'll talk about one of the most pervasive and quiet biases that affect workers at all ages, and that's ageism. In fact, across the United States, ageism has bled into our workplaces. It's prevented people from promotions, and it's caused others to be forced into redundancy. This is costing businesses money. And without turning the page, we will see operational efficiencies decline in the coming years. That's why I'm so excited today to be joined by Maureen Wiley Clough. She's an unlikely advocate in the ageism space, mostly because of her own age. At 37, she was called a dinosaur by her employer, a tech company. And this pushed Maureen to become one of the clearest, loudest, and most respected voices in the age-inclusive space movement. Maureen is the host of one of my favorite podcasts, It Gets Late Early, and I'm so excited to bring her to the show today. Maureen, welcome to Population Next.
thank you so much for having me. This is such a treat already. So excited to be here.
The pleasure is all mine. I've been following you for years, as you know, and certainly am an admirer of your podcast, which is called It Gets Late Early, which is both funny and uncomfortably true. What does It Gets Late Early mean to you, and what should your listeners be taking from it?
I mean, man, it means the world is moving quickly. Things move quickly. It's kind of like the Ferris Bueller line. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you might miss life. Something like that. I think I just botched it. But for anybody who knows that movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's like life is just going by so fast. And someday you're going to wake up and be like, oh my gosh, I'm, quote, old. And how did that happen? Where did the time go? I just got back from my 20th college reunion. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, how is this possible? And yet here we are. So it really means that life moves quickly, things happen quickly, and suddenly you will find yourself in a position that you never really thought you would be. And that goes, I think, for everybody. I think it's a very human thing. And so it's something that we all need to sort of be aware of. Like, you will be in this place at some point. So wake up.
And you were caught up in this relatively early in your career. Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, you were called a dinosaur at the age of 37 by your employer?
Yeah, it was, well, thankfully it wasn't actually my employer. It was an employee. But yes, I was called a dino at age 37, the ripe old age of 37 at this tech company. And at first I was like, what is he? How rude. Like, I'm not old. What is he talking about? And I looked around the room and I was like, wait a minute. Like, he's actually kind of not wrong here. I am one of the older employees at this company. And how on earth can that be possible? Like, why and how? And so that's what really sparked my interest in looking into why this this demographic delta was there when it came to the workplace. And when I did sort of a retrospective analysis on my workplaces across my career, even at market leaders, not just, venture-backed startups where you might assume the work population might be a little bit younger, I realized it was everywhere, everywhere. And it seemed like there were no older people in their 40s, 50s, and beyond that weren't sort of C-suite, VP, senior director, or really anything below that was not really present. And I was like, is there an up or out sort of aging out phenomenon? And if so, why is no one talking about it? And so when I started asking around, I realized everybody is worried about, quote, aging out of the workplace, and no one is doing a dang thing about it. And I thought that is such a huge miss in an era where people are having conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Why is this left off the table? Age is the one thing we all have in common. And ageism, which is essentially discrimination or bias on the basis of age, is the one thing that will happen, the one universalism that will hit all of us. So how is this being left off the table? And that's what sparked my entry into this realm.
Right. And I think, just a level set for the listeners today, ageism does exist in all types of workplaces across the country, despite it being illegal. But the one thing I've been taken by, not just from listening to you, but also doing my own research for my book, is that there is no industry more pervasive with ageism than the tech industry.
Yep. That is
what do you think,
accurate.
drives that? Is it just kind of the forward-thinking nature of it? Go fast or fail? Like what is buttressing this pervasive bias in that industry?
There's been this sort of trope of the founder. It's been the kid who dropped out of college with a hoodie in his dorm room or moving into his parents' basement. And that has been super persistent. And that is what venture capital looks to fund. It's fascinating. The funding for younger people is a thing, and older people, not so much, even though the outcomes for success are higher for older founders. But there's been this sort of undercurrent of a concept that to innovate, you have to be youthful. You have to be, on the forefront of new technologies. And I think some of that comes from the concept that you are getting the latest and greatest, if you will, at your education place, like hopefully Stanford or Harvard or something, MIT like that, if you're thinking Silicon Valley. But there's this concept that it's impossible to be on the forefront of anything, of innovation or any sort of new frontier if you're over, 25, which is absolutely ludicrous. And it's something that continues. There's like this drumbeat of, you're too old to, take this sort of step, or, you're too old to change your ways, and you can't actually teach an old dog new tricks. That's a common stereotype, but It's become just very much a drumbeat in the tech industry. And I think it's because we equate like technology with new or cool, which, is now kind of funny when I think about, what tech is, and it's bled into everything. What isn't tech? But yeah, there's just this persistent myth and stereotype that is completely ingrained in that whole ecosystem. And it's entirely wrong. In fact, all the systems that we use today were built by people who are now older, right? Like they actually built it back in the day. And now, you think of like Y2K and, all the hysteria around what was going to happen when, everything went down, and the people who were using COBOL, and they were the people, the COBOL developers, like they were in such high demand because they needed to know that architecture. And that is a critical component of some of these, new technologies is understanding where we've come from the people who actually architected it in the beginning.
Right.
So,
but I think we should also be clear here too. Like we often think about ageism in the workplace being directed exclusively towards older adults, but it's also a younger worker problem too, especially for Gen Z, who seems to be on the receiving end of a tremendous amount of bias in the workplace today.
That is 100% true. And actually, that was one of the biggest aha moments for me in doing this podcast and starting this work, was understanding that ageism is not solely leveled at people over the age of 40, or in my case, 37, right? But it's something that hits people of all ages across the spectrum of age. And it is, again, that bias on the basis of age alone. And you can absolutely be considered, quote, too young for something and discounted and absolutely diminished by virtue of exactly when you were born, right? Even if that was, a lot more recently. And it's something that really fascinated me because I never thought of it that way. And then when I saw the recent data that was done by McKinsey and Lean In last year, they talked about how actually it's younger women more than older women who report ageism in the workplace. That shocked me. And then when I started to think about it, I was like, oh yeah, I actually realized I was on the hunt for respect. And part of respect earlier in my career, I felt was like looking like I'd earned my stripes. And the fact of the matter is people do discount people on the basis of how they appear, the age that they are. And it's really awful. And, ageism is something that really has impacted Gen Z. I mean, they're coming into a just absolute trash job market right now where entry-level roles are being increasingly obliterated. And it's heartbreaking because they're going to be looking at this system that's not working for them. And then on top of that, they have a heap of ageism coming their way. And in fact, recently there was a survey done that said that 42% of hiring managers, 42% admit to having a bias against people by virtue of what their age is or how they appear, right? And that goes for, quote, too young and too old. And for women, interestingly, there seems to be no right age. Like women are seen as either too young to be a leader or too old, irrelevant, a has-been, a hack, what have you. And there's really kind of no middle ground. So women it's always fun for us. We kind of get everything, we bear the brunt a little bit harder. But ageism, it gets all of us. For sure.
Yeah. And it's certainly one of those things where you never realize it's happening until it happens to you.
Exactly. And it struck me, it's one of those things you have this there's this cognitive dissonance. Like, people get older, but somehow, some way you think it's not going to happen to you. Like, I remember distinctly starting to see the first signs of aging on my face and being like, what the heck is that line? Like, and, getting a gray and be like, what? Like, this is not something that is supposed to happen to me. We all have this sort of inner compass that suggests that we are younger than we are and that we present to the outside world. And it shows up and suddenly you're hit with this and you're like, oh my gosh. And suddenly you're contending with a whole slew of problems that you never really thought about deeply. So that's why when I uncovered this as a, persistent issue, something everybody was thinking about, but doing nothing about, I was like, dude, we cannot be silent about this any longer. And we've got to start this conversation. And I had a hunch, of course, that the only way that companies would think about this would be if they understood that they'd actually lose money if they didn't employ people of all ages, which they will.
And that's a perfect pivot point for us because, this is obviously it's a moral issue, it's a social issue, but there's also a business side to this. And there's 100%. A challenge for organizations to maintain really high operational excellence if they either don't have the right promotion pipeline for younger workers and they don't have the right retention strategy for older ones. Can you walk me through some of your thinking on this right now and perhaps what some of the data is suggesting?
Yeah. The data suggests that teams that have intergenerational representation of all ages have more productivity, better productivity, and greater outcomes for the business, more innovation. All of that is there. It's just as you have seen with other forms of diversity, right? So businesses that do this reap the rewards. And like you said, there is a dearth of training for people. There's a lack of sort of a promotional path through these organizations at present. And young people who are in these organizations are dying for mentorship. Adobe did a study recently, and 83% of Gen Z was desirous of having a mentor at the organization, and only 52% had one, which I thought was actually higher than I imagined it would be. But nonetheless, there's still a gap there, and people are not proactively reaching out and helping people build their careers and setting them up for success as an organization. It's kind of like sink or swim, figure it out, good luck to you. And that's a huge miss because these younger workers are not getting the benefit of the experienced workers within their organizations, helping them see around corners, helping them show them, the different pieces of the puzzle and why things are the way they are and how to avoid certain pitfalls, right? And there's this institutional knowledge that is built up with all these experienced workers. And that also extends to, by the way, just straight up life experience. It's not just professional experience. Life experience really helps too. And so companies are missing out on the opportunity to pair people up and create these sorts of connections and this collaboration that can help businesses go farther faster. And I firmly believe that those companies out there that don't actually take advantage of having these, 5 generations in the workplace and don't actually proactively put people together, they're going to be losing out. And, we have everybody saying we don't have enough people to fill these jobs. There's a labor shortage. And at the same time, they're saying nobody wants to work. And it's like, okay, like what is happening here? Like, where's the disconnect? And certainly I feel very strongly that the companies that aren't adapting to ensuring that they provide an opportunity for people who are older are going to be in super hot water really soon. Because like you study so beautifully, right? Like demographic change is here. It's already here. It's happening right now. And companies are kind of flat-footed in their approach to this. And that's a huge problem for them. So companies that aren't thinking about what is going to attract, retain, and promote people who are over age 40 in their companies, they're in trouble. And all too often, when I look at a tech company job listing, it's like kombucha on tap and happy hours after work and, ping pong tables and all of that. It's not like 401k, like help with childcare. It's not those sorts of things that older workers care about. And so I think a lot of companies out there are really missing the mark.
So I'm going to pick at that for a second here.
Go
it
for
almost
it.
sounds like these companies are coding youth into their culture
100.
and then projecting it onto prospective employees. And these are just in the basic offerings that you've suggested, but there's some language barriers too that come up in the application process, like digital native. Walk me through some of those that are signaling to older workers that they may not be welcome at that company.
Yeah. I mean, there are things like you said, like digital native, hungry. That's another one. Hungry. They say things like, I want a ninja. I'm sorry, what like 43-year-old mother is going to think that she's a digital native ninja who wears a lot of hats? Like they are telling you without telling you that they want young. It is all coded language and it's right in there. And sometimes they literally will actually just say young or, recent graduate, right? Which, sometimes obviously people can go to college at different ages, but we know what they mean when they say recent graduate, right?
Right.
And sometimes it's actually coded into the application process within the applicant tracking systems where you literally can't pick a date before a certain time, right? As your date of birth or your date of graduation. And I see this all the time. And it's like, well, you could go ahead and lie to get your application through, but what does that tell you about the organization? And when I've actually spoken with organizations that have been flagged either by me or by others who've seen this, they invariably tell me, oh, that's a mistake. That was, copied over from another job description that was an internship. So again, like suggesting that internships can only be held by young people, if you will, which I disagree with. But I mean, has anyone seen The Intern with, Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway? It's a thing. But anyhow, I really feel like companies, they say that this is a mistake. And I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. I certainly am not one to go blast people on the internet without some proof or anything like that. But they're not all mistakes. This is happening too frequently for it always to be a mistake. It's a deliberate attempt to push certain types of applicants out and keep certain ones in. And, the EEOC has nailed companies for this in the past. There was a company called iTutor Group that was sued because they actually were precluding applicants who were over the age of 55 as women or over the age of 60 as men, because women aren't allowed to age as much as men are.
Wow. So gender and age bias.
Gender and age bias. Yeah. Super cool. So they got nailed by the EEOC, but this is happening. Workday just was hit with a class action on the basis of an age discrimination allegation that's still out there. We don't know if it's going to be the case in the end, but it's an interesting thing that this is something that people are, I believe, really kind of waking up to and starting to get a little bit loud about, which is great. But certainly age discrimination is one of the hardest types of discrimination to prove. So it remains to be seen how much we can actually do in the face of this. So it's one of those situations where we need to be aware that it's going to happen to us because ageism is not going away. It's coded in our DNA. It's the way humans operate. We have been also fed the societal narrative that younger equals better, particularly women. We worship at the fountain of youth. That's just a thing. And there's an anxiety that comes with aging. And I think it's probably born in the fact that we recognize it as a proof of our own mortality and thinking that, oh, life is slipping away. I have fewer chances. So I think that's really embedded within us as humans. And we can certainly create awareness about the issue. But I think we need to know it's unlikely to ever completely go away. So we have to actually take it upon ourselves to figure out how do we operate within this society and put ourselves with our best foot forward and give ourselves the best shot for success, even knowing that this is a thing.
Right. And for our listeners, the EEOC is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the federal agency responsible for handling these age discrimination employment claims. And Maureen, we've talked about tech briefly, but there must be other industries that you've seen, you've heard of, that have pushed people out too early because of their age, or might not be given the right pathways for younger people to move forward. Can you share a few of those? The creative industries come to mind, like advertising.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Advertising is a huge one. That's intensely problematic. Ageism is very prevalent there. I would also say the ones you might think of, right? So I would say acting, filmmaking, all of those sort of creative spaces, modeling, certainly. Fashion is another one, right? Where there's just an entrenched ageism embedded within that entire industry. So those are some that really come to mind. And then I would say just in general, corporate. It's just across all different industries within the realm of corporate, I would say. And like we were talking about earlier, there really aren't enough pathways that are being created for younger people in these organizations. There used to be much more of an emphasis on training programs within these organizations. And, back in the day, you might get in at Intel or something and have a very specific training program that you would go through. And increasingly, companies are kind of shying away from that. And they're sort of letting people just go it alone. And it's like, how do we learn any of the workplace norms? How do we learn how to show up and be professional? By being alongside other people next to us who are doing that. And poor Gen Z, they've, come of age during the pandemic. There's much more remote work. There's hybrid work. They haven't been able to be side by side with people in the office to the degree that, for example, I, as an older millennial, had been. And that was how I learned how to show up. So there's a lot of unfairness being hurled at Gen Z when it comes to, a quote unquote lack of professionalism or, not knowing how to show up at work. They haven't been taught. We learn from one another and they haven't had that chance.
Right. So we talked about some of the bad guys, about some of the bad actors that exist within this ageism in the workplace space. But there must be some good guys out there too. Do you have any that you particularly like in terms of either industry or specific company?
I love that question. I love looking for the silver lining. I'm so all about that, especially in this world that seems very much on fire a lot of the time. I feel as though it's hard to pinpoint with complete accuracy places that I can just blanket statement say, yeah, you're good to go here, because everything's so dependent on, frankly, like even just your own direct manager, right? Like we're all one management change away from hating our jobs. That's the reality. Or conversely, loving your job. But I know Atlassian is a company that I would point to that has actually proactively sought out age representation and thought about age inclusion for years now. So that's fantastic. It's funny because sometimes I'll say a company that's more legacy, like a Microsoft or, a Dell or something. But the things that I have heard, I get a lot of feedback from the audience and anecdotal evidence of what's happening at these organizations. And I can't wholeheartedly stamp those companies with approval based on what I'm hearing. It's challenging, but I think we might come to a place, and this is a little bit at the loss for Gen Z, which I hate because I feel really, really so much for younger people and what they're experiencing right now. But I think with the entry level jobs increasingly getting obliterated either by AI or being outsourced to cheaper places for labor, I think it's going to actually increase the value of experience at these companies because you need a human in the loop that's checking the work that, is being done by these entities, right? And so I think that there might, by virtue of that, be a little bit of less ageism in the mix for experience. But I don't like that it comes at the cost of younger people, right? I wish that weren't the case. But I feel like that might start to take hold. And I also think that those who have soft skills, regardless of industry, that's going to be really helpful. as is anyone who's working in industries where you cannot be replaced, right? Where it's an in-person type of situation, or, you have a very particular skill, what have you, that is really irreplaceable. But for the most part, most of us are replaceable in corporate. That's the sad reality.
Yeah. I mean, I say all the time, you need the 3 C's for the future: creativity, communication, and compassion. Those are the 3 that are probably going to get us through this big transition, especially with AI knocking at our doorstep.
Yeah.
Maureen, I want to pivot just slightly to talk a bit about the individual, because we all know the relationship between the individual worker and their employer. They have to provide value to their employer in order to keep their job. And sometimes they're not being let go just because of ageism. They're being let go because of the way they appear on the balance sheet in terms of their cost. How can these individuals who might be at the upper end of the income stream of their career really work to prove their worth to their employers? Because, as we know, nothing is guaranteed in life.
It really isn't. That was one of the hardest lessons and the biggest sort of gut punches to realize. It's like, there's no stability, there's no security. You don't have control over everything. So I would say, I mean, first of all, be aware that this is likely to happen. Most people who lose their jobs in their 50s aren't doing so by their own choice. It's happening to them, not by their choice. And so you're likely to have this occur. So start planning for it now. I don't want to be doom and gloom, but like, do plan for it. And take opportunity to create what I call a win wallet. So anytime you have a win, or a project comes to completion, or you get a great compliment from your boss or an external client or partner, put that in your win wallet. You want that handy for when you have, a promotion possibility, when you have your review cycle, when you're going for an interview, frankly, when you're having a bad day and you need a little pick me up. Have that at the ready, because we forget what we've done at these companies. And the truth is, you've done a lot over the course of time. You're experienced, you know your stuff, and you should be proud. So keep that handy for yourself. If you haven't done that all along, just go back in time and get as much of that as you can, because I think that can really help you. And a lot of this is mindset and confidence, right? So know it's possible, it could happen. Start building that win wallet. And then, when you're thinking about the fact that you might not necessarily have the current job that you hold today in the future, start your plan B now. Start planning on the fact that that might not be there. So start networking like crazy. Start looking around and recognizing the value of all the people that you've come across, not just at work, but across your entire lives. That's all a network. And that's something that is a major boon to older people that I think people forget. And like you said, sometimes people are very quick to say, like, it's ageism. Sometimes it's not ageism. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you didn't show up to the interview the right way. Sometimes you haven't set yourself up for success particularly well. There can be all sorts of reasons behind. Maybe, their CEO's son went for the job. You just don't know. And so take control of what you can control, and take confidence in what you have already accomplished. You've gotten through so much. You have decades of experience at this point, and that's amazing. I would also say that it is absolutely incumbent upon everybody of all ages to start using AI. I'm sorry, it's just whether you like it or not, it's here to stay. It is unfolding at an insanely fast rate. It's making me a little uncomfortable, I'm not going to lie, but you cannot be left behind. And it is, I think, important, especially in light of the fact that there is bias against older candidates and older people at these companies as employees when it comes to AI. And a survey came out recently by Generation and Google.org that suggested that employers are pretty reluctant to hire people over 45, 50, so on and so forth, that are leveraging AI in their jobs. And sadly, we are now seeing a mandate essentially from pretty much every employer that you've got to be using generative AI in your jobs. So you have to know that there's going to be that bias. And so don't play into the stereotype by saying, I'm not touching that. Don't do that to yourself. Go out and get familiar.
I've talked to some older workers about this, in particular, this generative AI question and how they should be using it. And I equate it to the PC. Because that was something that certainly older Gen Xers started using in the workplace. Younger Gen Xers had as by default. Imagine if you told your boss, PC is really not for me. We look back 30 years now, and that sounds absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And the PC's movement into the workplace was relatively slow compared to generative AI.
Oh, yeah. That's a very strong point. But you're right. I mean, we have to recognize the moment we're in, and it might be a reality we don't find particularly convenient, but it's here. And so get on board and just do all you can to set yourself up for success. And I would imagine one of the smartest things that any worker across any industry right now could do is to start sort of a plan B in light of the face of the world, fact that the world is changing so quickly and that corporate employment is not the safety net that we used to think it was.
So a retirement plan and a pivot plan should be
Yeah.
built into the life plan.
Precisely. And it's not a fun reality to contend with, but it is reality. And we kind of just have to open our eyes and embrace it and just go forward with the best possible mindset that you can conjure up. And I know it's like climbing Everest some days, but it's really an important aspect to it. Not to get too woo-woo on you, but like honestly, it is important. Like it is.
Now, I know that we have a number of different business leaders listening to this show, and I'm wondering if you can point them to, because everyone's probably saying, okay, well, how do I do this? What are some low cost to no cost interventions they can make within their workplace starting today, right here, right now, to make them more inclusive so they can reap the benefits of a truly age diverse workforce?
The very first thing they can do is start talking about it. Age is so often just like kept completely out of the equation. I saw the stat on PwC's report that said essentially 92% of organizations don't even talk about age. So first of all, open yourself up to talking about it. You can start by looking at your job listings and descriptions within there. Do you have coded language in there? Check it out. If you do, maybe take a trip to your local generative AI tool of choice and like swap it out for different language, right? Or maybe even use your brain and do it yourself. Who knows? It's possible as well. But look at those. Start actually talking to the people in your organizations. Create an ERG around generations at the workplace or caregivers, which often pulls people of different generations together, right? And start openly discussing age in a safe way. It's not about like pointing fingers at one another and saying like, oh, we've done this wrong or whatnot. Just start having the conversation and lead with curiosity. And then another way you can do it is by starting to pair people of different generations together in the workplace as mentor and mentee. And by the way, it really is mentor and mentor because you can learn just as much from a younger person as you can from an older person. I've experienced this. I have a Gen Z social media consultant who I jokingly refer to as my therapist as well. And he teaches me so much. It's ludicrous. And again, like someone could look at him and be like, what does this guy know? Let me tell you, he knows a heck of a lot more about social media than I do. And he's a lot younger than I am. So again, we can't equate, knowledge and experience with age necessarily, right? It doesn't always line up. But start the conversation, start pairing people up, start getting curious, start thinking about things that maybe off the top of your head wouldn't necessarily seem to be problematic. But if you start thinking in the shoes of someone in a certain stage of life, which often correlates with age, like for example, if you have parents in your organization, which I'm sure you do, right? If you book standing meetings at like 8 a.m. for parents, that's really not very inclusive if you think about
Torture.
it. Because it is torture. And that is a way you can signal to your organization that you don't really care about people's needs outside of the workplace or about how their lives actually run, right? So it's little things like that. Like, please think about putting those in the middle of the day. If you have a standing recurring meeting with your team, try to be inclusive of people who are trying to just balance it all. Because God, it's impossible, isn't it? I don't know how anyone does it. How are we doing this?
We're all trying to keep the balls in the air right now.
Yeah.
Maureen, last question today. You said that culture shifts when people stop whispering and start talking. What are you hearing from your listeners? Because I know you have a very engaged listener base at It Gets Late Early about the things that are keeping them up at night and perhaps the things that give them hope for tomorrow.
Oh, keep them up at night is definitely the fact that ageism is so persistent and they're finding it to be an increasingly big hurdle in the job search and in their career progression. It's something that, people have this aha moment and I think they find the podcast and they're like, oh, my people, like, oh, other people are in this boat too. And misery loves company, right? So there's that sort of community aspect of it, which I think is one of the main reasons I created the show. Cause I was like, no more gaslighting. Ageism is real. This is a problem and we should be talking about it. But I also want it to be a place where people can learn skills and ways to overcome it and how to put their best foot forward. And so people will come and listen to the show, and I'll have a variety of experts on, career coaches and the like, who really sort of shift people's mindsets on how they can approach this and put the ball in their court to do so. So there's a certain amount of agency that is really critical here. And I'm seeing more and more people actually act, and that's awesome. So I know I'd have listeners reach out and say, like, I'm really struggling to find a job or something like that. And, I keep pushing them to keep going or to start incorporating some other skills into their repertoire or start something on their own. And they'll reach back out later and say, like, oh my gosh, I was about to throw in the towel entirely. And then I just got this great job, or I just decided to go out on my own. Thanks so much. So there is this sort of galvanizing force that's happening, which is really uplifting. And I do think oftentimes in downturns, we see a lot of entrepreneurial booms. And I think we are going to see so much of that. When the dust settles on all of this, if we are able to get the data, which is a big if we can get that data, I believe we are going to see that there was a disproportionate number of people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond that were part of these layoffs, right? And like you said, it's not always ageism. Sometimes it's just what the spreadsheet says and how much you cost and so on and so forth. But I think we're going to see that happen disproportionately to older people. And we are also going to see so many of those people turn to entrepreneurship and fractional work. And so I think we will have like a really glorious boom out of this that I'm excited about as a silver lining, but it's going to be kind of a tough hill to climb. And it's not all going to be sunshine and roses, but I like to think of myself as a realist with like a slight hinge toward optimism. And so I'm looking at this as a positive that we will have a lot of people in their 40s, 50s, 60s starting companies and creating the cultures that they wish that they had seen in corporate themselves all along, that will actually meet the needs of people across the spectrum of ages. Because guess what? Those people have also been young too. They know what people want at that stage of their lives. So I think we're going to have this, I think, unification that will come from that. I'm hopeful.
And for our listeners, the average age of a successful startup founder today is now 45. So if Maureen's prediction holds true, that number will increase in the coming years. Maureen, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a real pleasure.
So much fun. Thank you, Bradley.
That's our conversation today, but it's only just the beginning. If you're ready to challenge age bias in the workplace, if you believe that experience counts just as new perspectives do, I encourage you to follow Maureen and her podcast, It Gets Late Early. And if you want to dive into the demographic trends shaping our future and want to go deeper into those, understanding more of how this impacts what's coming, I encourage you to follow me on Substack at populationnext.com. Thanks so much for joining me today.